will Jacinda Ardern win government in her own right? It's a rare thing in New Zealand.
It is a rare thing in New Zealand. Under the history of MMP, that's the electoral system that's been in place since 1996. That is a fate that not a single party has been able to achieve. So the big question tonight, will Labor earn enough support to be able to govern in their own right, to be able to govern alone, or will they require the support of other parties such as the Greens? For the past 3 years, we know that Jacinda Ardern's Labor Party has been in government with coalition with Winston Peters' New Zealand First Party. There has also been a supply and confidence agreement between the Green Party and the Labor Party. Whatever the outcome is tonight, Kieran, we're likely to have a pretty good idea of it, a pretty clear indication of it quite early this evening. That's simply because of the sheer number of New Zealanders who have opted to vote early. Ahead of today, almost 2 million New Zealanders are voting early. That represents more than 50% of the enrolled population. Roughly 3.5 million New Zealanders are enrolled to vote. But of course, voting isn't mandatory here in New Zealand, so it's quite extraordinary just how many people have decided to vote early. Perhaps quite a few reasons for it. This has been quite a drawn-out campaign. To provide a little bit of context, the election was initially due to take place a month ago, but then just a couple of days into the campaign, we saw the resurgence of COVID-19 in the New Zealand community. Within days, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced that the election would be postponed, moved back by a month to today. We finally reached election day. I'm sure many people are extremely grateful, Kieran, that we've reached this stage, because certainly quite a bit of a campaign fatigue setting in across the country.
And Jackson, if we look at recent history in New Zealand politics, generally if New Zealand voters will give a government one term, they'll give them at least a second term, at the very least, as we saw with John Key, as we saw with Helen Clark before him.
Yeah, that's right. I think we have to go back a number of decades. I think 1960 was the last time that there was a single-term government here, a one-term government here in New Zealand. So, look, polls are pointing to Jacinda Ardern's Labor Party being returned to power. If we take a look at the 2017 election results here in New Zealand, it was a very different story. National polling, with 44.4%. Of the vote, Labor just shy of 37%, New Zealand First 7.2%. And even if we just look at earlier this year, prior to COVID-19, just prior to the first case of COVID-19 being recorded in New Zealand, the Labor Party was actually behind in the polls. National was ahead. They were polling in the mid to high 40s. So without COVID-19, it's easy enough to say now, but this would have been a very different contest. And there were a number of domestic policy issues that Jacinda Ardern, throughout her term in office, has been forced to grapple with. Not necessarily the best track record on some of those issues, such as housing. We can perhaps later in the evening go through some of the other issues. So in a way, Kieran, I really believe that COVID-19 provided a clean slate, if you like, for the Prime Minister. This is the most pressing issue. This is the only issue that is weighing on the minds of course, not just New Zealanders, but everyone right across the globe. And given the success that we've had here in New Zealand compared to other countries, well, that has obviously boded incredibly well for Jacinda Ardern and not so well for the National Party.
And so it was interesting just to pick up something you said there about Jacinda Ardern and some of the policy problems that she's had and the fact that things would have been closer. Because if you look internationally, Jackson, she's got quite a presence on the world stage, hasn't she? And it's very popular internationally, including in Australia. But talk us through, is it a different scenario in New Zealand? Is she not as popular at home?
Well, at the moment she's quite popular off the back of her handling of the COVID-19 response, and it's understandable why, if you look at the global picture, why Jacinda Ardern is so popular. Because if you look at the major events, the crises in New Zealand that have taken place throughout Jacinda Ardern's term in office, they have been extremely horrific, tragic events that have garnered so much coverage and international attention. And of course, I'm speaking about the March 15 terror attack in Christchurch, the Prime Minister leading by example with an incredibly compassionate response. We also saw decisive, swift action when it came to tightening the country's gun laws, and there was the Whakaari White Island volcanic eruption that took place almost a year ago, and of course more recently COVID-19. So internationally, Jacinda Ardern I guess is best known for her the way that she has handled those crises. But here at home there are more pressing issues that over the past few years. In 2017, Jacinda Ardern and Labor, they were promising a transformational change, and in many regards it hasn't always translated into what the Prime Minister promised back at the 2017 election. One example of that is Kiwi Build. It was Labor's flagship housing policy, an ambitious, incredibly ambitious policy to build 100,000 affordable homes for first home buyers over a 10-year period. Well, the scheme had to be redesigned because it turned out to be a massive flop. By now, there was set to be, or meant to be, 10,000 homes built. At the moment, as we speak, there were fewer than 1,000 homes that have been built as part of that project. So it certainly hasn't been smooth sailing for Jacinda Ardern and her Labor Party over the past 3 years, Kieran.
Yeah, and it hasn't been smooth sailing for the national opposition either. Talk us through it for viewers who are tuning in tonight, might not be across New Zealand politics as closely as you are. Explain to us the opposition leader, the change of leadership, because there hasn't been a lot of continuity there.
Yeah, multiple changes in leadership. There have been 4 National Party leaders. Of course, the former Prime Minister, Bill English, he lost the last election. Winston Peters in New Zealand First siding with Labor. Bill English resigning, quitting politics, replaced by Simon Bridges. Simon Bridges was in charge of the National Party at the beginning of the year when they were ahead in the polls. He wasn't the most, he was far from the most popular politician, but nonetheless the party vote was at quite a respectable level. But then COVID arrived. Jacinda Ardern, of course, dominated the headlines, was in the limelight on a daily basis, understandably, guiding the country through this crisis. And then earlier this year, Simon Bridges, as his party's support dropped drastically, rather dramatically, he was rolled, replaced by Todd Muller, who lasted in the job as Leader of the Opposition for around 50 days. Just over 3 months ago, Todd Muller, following his shock resignation, was replaced by Judith Collins. She is quite an experienced politician. She previously served as a minister when National were in power, but she has had an incredibly tough job, Kieran, over the past few months, given that significant gap in support between the Labor Party and the National Party in some of the most recent polling that we've seen in recent weeks. Though National really still languishing in the polls in the low 30s. I think 31 support for the party is at 31% in the TVNZ Colmar Brunton poll just a few days ago. So look. So National not in a great position leading into the election today. Judith Collins, she's done her best to remain hopeful and optimistic, and that's what you have to do as leader of the opposition, because if you give up, your supporters will give up, and your base will give up, and will look elsewhere to support other parties.